Hello, everybody. The webinar will begin shortly. So hello, everyone, and welcome to this Global Government Forum webinar, looking at how to get the right skills mix for a modern digital government. My name is Richard Johnston, and I'm the Executive Editor of Global Government Forum, which is a media and events company focused on bringing together public and civil servants from around the world to share best practice. And this webinar today is on a very interesting and I think important topic. We at Global Government Forum know from our research with governments around the world that governments are focused on developing a highly skilled, inclusive and thriving workforce. And we've heard from governments how they are looking to revamp recruitment processes to be more effective and looking to build the digital skills that they need to deliver the services that citizens expect. So in this session, supported by our knowledge partner Skillsoft, we wanted to bring together public servants from around the world to discuss how they are focused on improving skills in government. In this session today, we'll discuss how governments around the world are identifying and meeting the skills gaps and challenges that they face. We'll discuss how governments can make sure that they have the skills that they need through recruitment and upskilling, from the core skills for civil servants to the specialist talent to drive more digital government. We have a great panel to discuss this topic today, and I will introduce them momentarily. But before I do so, I also want to urge you to get involved in our conversation. However you are watching the session today, you should be able to see a Q&A button, and please do use it to submit your thoughts and questions for our panel. How does your organization understand its skills needs? How do you make sure that job descriptions are being kept up to date with technological developments? And how do you make sure that your own skills are keeping up with technological developments? And do you think recruitment practices could be made more agile where you work? We're going to have a conversational session today, so please don't wait to submit your questions. If you do have questions you would like to put to the panel, do submit them as soon as you can, and I will put them to our guests today throughout the session. So, as I said, let us introduce the panel. First of all, we're joined by Peter van den Brune. Peter is the General Advisor and Manager for Key Skills Development in the Federal Public Service for Policy and Support in Belgium. For 25 years, Peter has been working in the field of learning and development within the Belgian government, and he currently leads a team of training managers organizing training in different fields, including personal effectiveness, communication, digital skills, foreign languages, EU matters, and civil service skills. An expert on human resources development, Peter has shared his experience with civil servants all over the world, from Kazakhstan to Tahiti, from Guinea to South Korea, to name it a few. He coordinates international relations in the field of training and learning in the Belgian government. So it's fantastic to have Peter with us. We're also joined today by Lauren Hunter. Lauren is the Director of Talent Policy and Platforms at the Office of the Chief Information Officer of Canada. She joined the Canadian government in 2008 and has worked extensively on Indigenous issues, strategic policy, innovation, and digital products. Working with our team, she launched the first innovation hub in the Government of Canada in 2014 and has helped several other departments establish their own hubs and labs. Since 2017, Lauren has been leading platform experimentation and delivery related specifically to digital talent solutions. So again, great to have Lauren with us today. We're also joined today by Niko Mabunda, the Chief Director of the Office of the Director General of the Department of Public Service and Administration in South Africa. The department is responsible for setting the norms and standards in HR planning across the government, as well as employment, performance development, transformation and workplace environment, as well as issues including labour relations, e-government and service delivery across the public service. Niko has experience as a project manager at an international development firm, policy management, development and evaluations, and previously as a policy advisor and analyst in the office of the Premier within the Gauteng province. Niko was responsible for conducting research and advisory services on policy issues in support of the Cabinet and Premier. And we're also joined by Mark Onisk, the Chief Content Officer at our knowledge partner Skillsoft. As Chief Content Officer at Skillsoft, Mark oversees its catalogue, setting strategic direction. He has expanded Skillsoft's audiobooks and launched a summary product, creating the largest corporate learning library. Earlier, Mark also led the strategic development and developed solutions for clients. So it's a fantastic panel that we have with us today to discuss this topic around how government can get the right skills mix. And I wanted to kick things off with Peter and ask him, how does the Belgian government go about understanding its skills needs?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Richard. Good afternoon to all of you there. Indeed, in Belgium, when we're making needs analysis, we're following the ADDIE model when we're talking about training. And the ADDIE model says you have different steps in the training process. The A stands for analysis, and then you have the different further steps. The most important thing is this analysis, because we find that very often we're spending a lot of money and time in training, and in our federal public service, we play a central role providing training for the Belgian Federal Civil Service. Very often when people go back to their offices, sometimes nothing changes. And when we see that nothing changed, it's probably because the needs have not been very well identified or analyzed. So how we do this, we're actually following a kind of four-step approach. When we're developing curricula and an online training offer or a classroom-based training offer for our civil servants, a very important input that we use is what we call the strategic input. And there we try to collect all kinds of information coming from strategic management plans, from what the government sees as the most important objectives for the future. But we also heavily rely on the information from networks. So there is a network of all the presidents of the board of directors, let's say the most important civil servants in the ministries. We bring them together in networks. We have an HR network. So through these networks and through the information from a ministerial and strategic level, we try to assess what are the skills that can be linked to these strategic goals for the civil service. A second input next to the strategic input is what we call the client input. And when we're talking about clients, we're talking about our civil servants in the different ministries. They could be team leaders, they could be managers, they could be any kind of civil servant. We have different ways and procedures to try and assess what their individual or team needs are. And we take this into account when we decide to create courses, online offers, or classroom-based courses. The third input we use in the Belgian Federal Civil Service is data-based input. We're trying to work as evidence-based as possible. So we're looking at data. We have data scientists in our organization who monitor different procedures, from participation in previous courses to how popular certain courses are, to the number of times we've been able to register or launch a course rather. So we take into account these data. And then the fourth final input we use to determine a kind of general curriculum for the entire civil service is based on benchmarking and bench learning. And we're part of European networks, of worldwide networks, where we're trying to learn from each other in other countries. What are they doing? What are they offering in terms of skill gaps to their different civil servants or participants? Because we find sometimes if you limit your needs analysis to just asking the people what they need, they'll come up with the things that they're consciously aware of that they don't know yet. But there are some things that they're even unconsciously about that they don't know yet. And one example there I'd like to give is AI. We learned from our South Korean colleagues that they were already heavily investing in all kinds of skills, trainings, and developments on the topic of AI, when quite many of us in the Belgian civil service were getting used to the idea of, oh yeah, there's something like AI arriving. So it's through these international benchmarkings also that we identify skills that maybe we were prone to miss because some of the questions were not launched right from the start.
Great, that's really helpful, Peter. Couple of points I want to follow up on that. One is on AI, and I think we're going to come to AI later in the session, so I will park that for now. But that's a really interesting example. I wanted to pick up on what you said as the client input, as you put it, and assessing what organizations need. I'm really interested in that idea. What's the process there? What are the questions that you go into an organization and ask managers about to help you define what skills they will need and where you can help them in terms of training?
Yeah. I should say the approach we're trying to follow at the Belgian Federal Administration is by making a gap analysis, and for that we actually use the Kirkpatrick evaluation model. Maybe some of you are familiar with Kirkpatrick and the 4 evaluation levels. We use the 4-level approach already in the face of needs analysis, and so the major question we're addressing to organizations, middle managers, teams, whatever, is like, what's the problem? What's the challenge? This is what Kirkpatrick in the evaluation model identifies as the highest level, which will be afterwards measured by the impact of your training actions. And then we descend one level and we go, okay, to what extent does this problem or challenge, to what extent does it translate to things which are observable in the workplace? And once we've identified this, we go down one level more and say, okay, from whatever gaps we see or malfunctionings or challenges in the workplace, which of these are linked to skills and knowledge? The 3rd level. And then once we've identified this, only then we descend to the lowest level to, okay, what kind of trainings or learning solutions could we develop, could we create in order to bridge the gap regarding these knowledge or competency deficits. And the main challenge or problem we were confronted with in the past also is that very often when you try to analyze needs, when you ask staff, when you ask line managers, like, what do you need? Very often they arrive at the lowest level. They arrive with learning solutions. They arrive like, give me a 3-day team building course with my team in the mountains, because they're not working very well together. So give them, and they're arriving with solutions. And the danger we found is to jump to these and say, okay, we're going to plan more training in that team building because this is what you're asking for. Very high risk that after the training, the team will not perform better because maybe we had to go deeper in the analysis. So when going deeper, we try to ask, before sending a team to the mountains, we say, okay, but what's the real problem? What's the real challenge? How does it relate to the workplace? And sometimes we see that it's not even a skills-based problem. There might be other things linked to procedures, linked to hardware or software things. And when we are coming to the skills, then we're trying to really apply gap analysis. Okay, what is it really that they need and which they don't have yet? And one of those typical questions we ask also is like, what kind of skills development actions in this field did they have before? Because sometimes we see that whole teams are put together through a competency development action, but that some people actually master the skills already, but they're just not showing them or applying them in the workspace. There's nothing that negative for your motivation if you're forced to go once again through a training course when you feel like I mastered these skills already. So it's slightly complicated because the fact that you don't observe skills being used in the workplace does not necessarily mean that the skills are not there. There might be different reasons for that. So this is the kind of approach where we're using, and we link this to a lifelong learning strategy. And this lifelong learning strategy is important because, as in many other countries, I guess, we're confronted with the fact that the budgets are always being decreased. It's not that easy anymore to replace people just by recruiting and recruiting and recruiting new staff. Whereas in Belgium, for instance, we have a system where lots of civil servants are permanent officers. So we see that there is a constantly changing world around us. And you mentioned AI. We're going to get back to this later on, I assume. The impact of AI is huge. So some people, some of our civil servants, after 15 or 20 years doing the same function or job, that job is not there anymore. So instead of constantly recruiting and being faced with a group which has no job or function, we are having to think about upskilling and reskilling those people. And for this, we launched different initiatives, and we can get into more detail later on in the discussion. But this constant learning approach is for us very, very important as well, because we feel you can't expect people to all of a sudden after 20 years being out of that fixed job say, okay, I'm going to learn something new now, if for the previous 20 years you've let them do the same thing without inviting them to learn. So there's a heavy responsibility for us there, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, thank you very much for that answer. The process of how you go through uh, that kind of hierarchy to identify the skills is absolutely fascinating. And then yes, the impact of changing job roles over time. Again, as I said, we do want to touch on that later in the session. So if anyone's got any specific questions they would like Peter to answer on that, please do send them in. Lauren, I wanted to come to you next to kind of follow up on that and get the Canadian perspective in terms of some of the skill strategies and initiatives that the government in Canada has used to help ensure that it has the skills that it needs.
Thanks, Richard. So as Richard mentioned in my bio, I'm actually in the digital and tech part of government. I'm not in the HR or the Public Service Commission side of government. So a little bit of an anomaly on the panel there. So because we do have international folks joining, I'll just explain a little bit about the Government of Canada. So in the Government of Canada, things are very, very separated. So the mandate authority for classifying jobs is different than the HR teams and departments that will post jobs using very often quite different language, quite different skills. The Public Service Commission is separate again, but that's the place that the jobs are posted and they oversee the total system. The learning and development is done by the Canada School, but any learning and development that's specific for a job or a need is done by departments on kind of an ad hoc basis. And the data and the intelligence about who needs what and who's doing what is very often not transferred between these systems. So we have these sort of silos with very high walls between them. And despite best efforts to collaborate, very often you end up with a very fractured ecosystem. And that was leading to undesirable outcomes like 250 days to staff a position in the digital and tech space, a very high dependency on contractors to come in and fill the gaps because digital and tech just can't wait. And so we've been working in a part of government for the last 8 years where what we've been trying to do is reimagine this model. And the the model is really for the digital and tech space. It's not a whole of government space, because those mandate authorities that have all those different pieces of the pie continue to have their pieces of the pie. But in the chief information officer space, all the CIOs of Canada kind of got together and said, we have to do something, and it has to be something different. So what we've been trying to build is this concept of a sort of a central brain, where we think not only in terms of an employee life cycle, like it's not recruitment over here and learning and development over here, and career mobility over here, but it's a sort of central arc where we're imagining a human being who is an applicant, who becomes an employee, who goes on a learning journey, who may move to another department, who then gets promoted, and how do we understand that? And we have been building out piece by piece this sort of central system that is able to do those different functionalities. But at the heart of this is starting to have a very, very different relationship with data and how we think about what government needs for its talent. So talent isn't about recruitment or about learning and development separate, but we think of it more as talent sourcing. And so sometimes the source for that talent may be recruitment, sometimes it may be upskilling. And we've built this infrastructure around all these pieces, but very specific to the digital space, because that's within the mandate of the Chief Information Officer of Canada. So for example, we have an IT training fund that is part of the IT workers collective agreement. When they want to go and do any formal training that is connected to the fund, that's instructor-led training, they apply on our platform, and they have that accumulates to their profile, which is their employee profile, which they probably use to apply for the job in the first place. And then they may skill up, and then they may be qualified in a pool to go somewhere else, and then the search and find for the manager to get that person, they come there. So it's really reimagining this notion of, instead of a bunch of silos, more of a model where everything comes into the central brain, and then what you need is drawn out of the central brain. And in the process, people are treated more holistically than having to kind of manage each separate part of their path in a very fractured kind of way.
Great, thank you, Lauren. It's a really interesting process that's been developed in the government, and totally take your point about that being in the office of the CIO in particular. How do you assess in that process that you've set out, having the central brain? How does the central brain, as it were, work out what skills are needed and where they need to be deployed in its universe?
So through lots of hard work. So because the classified positions are very dated, and they are the government's methodology for creating a classified position is this concept that structure, once created, will be stable for eternity, for what feels like eternity. It's a behavioral bias towards stability and structure in an era where what we actually see on the ground is the need for agility and data. So we have built a job template library that is a skills-based economy. So the whole platform runs on skills-based recruitment, which is novel for the Government of Canada. Everything else runs on sort of paragraph descriptions that are not reusable in many cases. And the paragraphs for recruitment don't match in direct skills and language the paragraphs for the generic job descriptions, because those are meant to be more broad. And so we use the skills-based infrastructure, and we've created a taxonomy for that, and we've created job templates that go with that taxonomy. But we're working in a smaller pond, so we don't have to map the entirety of the universe. And because we're working within IT, with IT partners who work with us to build new job posters and things like that, it's easy for us to keep refreshing the data. But unlike the older HR systems that we have in Canada, by design, everything in our system can be updated in real time. We always understand that that skills taxonomy is not fixed. It's going to be continuously evolving. And the same thing with the jobs that we provide the templates for. And then obviously when we provide a template, we anticipate the departments will want the flexibility to then put their own things in there. So again, we're moving towards this concept of central guideposts, central currency of understanding, but paired with a lot of flexibility and agility for people to right size to whatever their need is in real time. The focus really is on accelerating the speed and the efficiency of the system overall.
Thank you, Lauren. And yeah, I want to explore some of those issues later on as well, and how perhaps the lessons from that approach can be shared across government. Nigel, I wanted to come to you next to talk about the South African experience. We're talking about skills in government, and obviously a lot of the governments around the world had a lot of immediate requirements for people to work differently around the coronavirus pandemic, and the Making Government Work research report, which Global Government Forum completed by interviewing 12 cabinet secretary grade officials around the world, highlighted that during the pandemic things were done differently in governments. So what was the experience in South Africa? What progress was made in terms of improving the skills of civil servants during the pandemic to do things differently?
Thank you so much, Richard, and good afternoon, well, from South Africa. Good afternoon to the attendees and my fellow panelists. So maybe what we can do is that in South Africa, we have a unitary state, so it's a little bit different to the colleagues that I have on the panel, which means that from across the different levels of government, the national and provincial levels, they are all governed by the same Public Service Act. And out of that, we have about 1.2 million public servants. And but out of that 1.2 million public servants, only about 9,200 are senior managers. The rest are individuals that are actually doing the work at the level that they're supposed to be doing it. And we have had a number of, because of government being stable and being an employer of choice, and I guess it's something that is all over the world, that once someone joins government, it's quite difficult for them to leave. We actually have a high number of individuals that are above the age of 55%, or the age of 55, sorry, not percent. And that has an impact on how you then do the constant learning that Peter was talking about, the reskilling and so forth. But it also improves our ability, or requires our ability to be improved when it comes to data governance, analysis, management, and the use in decision making that Lauren was talking about. Because without that, then it becomes quite difficult for us to understand what exactly it is that we want to do. So one of the biggest lessons that we had from the COVID-19 response in South Africa was actually on that, the need for constant learning, the need for constant reskilling, and the need for understanding the level and type of data that you have and how you govern that data and how you make use of it. So those were quite important statements that I read from the two colleagues of mine when they spoke, and that we have seen as a lesson. And those are the main challenges linked to the lessons from COVID-19, the issues of dwindling public funds, limited resources. It's something that is all over the world, where government are supposed to be lean and effective, I guess, as we deliver services, as everyone wants to see an impact on the amount of on the public taxes that they spend on. So I want to list a number of things that we have seen in South Africa. The biggest thing was quite surprising, is that the government is capable and the public knows it. So there is no way that we can. So when someone says that it takes about 5 years or 3 months or so long to make a decision, it's not because that we are unable to make a decision. It's because someone is sitting with a file somewhere and is not processing it. And now we've been exposed because we're able to issue death certificates within hours. We're able to allocate beds within 2 minutes. We're able to know who is where and where are the resources in terms of doctors, nurses, and so forth. We even knew each and every oxygen machine that is owned by the public service. So we know what must be done. The public knows that we know how it must be done, and we are capable. That was one of the key interesting things that came about. The other part is that efficiency is quite critical. So there is a need for us to reduce red tape, to redefine state capacity, so that we understand how we become a responsive government in terms of efficiently, effectively, and timeously responding to the needs of the public in the republic. So that is quite an interesting aspect of it, because it links to the first part, that the number of people that you have within the service, are they required at that level? And are you correctly locating them in terms of their qualifications and the needs that we need for them to deliver the services that we have? In South Africa, we have an ethos called Batho Pele, which means people first. And it lists a number of things that we must do as a public service, that we must respond to those. So we have noted that there are a number of highly efficient public servants that actually lives by those ethos. But there is also a high number of other colleagues that are just there for the ride, whether bumpy or not. And we need to have an improved performance management and development system. So where we link the performance of an individual with that of an institution, but also link their development in terms of the skills, the competences, and qualifications that they have to have to deliver. The other part is, on average, public servants in South Africa, because of the generous nature of the skills development system for employees, in South Africa, there's a law that requires that 1% of the wage bill must be directed towards skills development. On average, public servants have 3 degrees in South Africa. A junior degree and maybe one honors as well as a master's degree. And that means that people are qualified. The difference might be, are they qualified in the right space, and are they using those qualifications, and then are they located in the spaces that they're supposed to be? And then the other bigger issue is that when we talk about professionalization and professionalism, it is very important to understand that ethics they must not be an exception, they must be the bar. And when we talk about ethics, we talk about discipline, about being accountable, and about being able to use efficiently the resources of government for the public, and not being able to move around. And then lastly, as part of these lessons that we have learned when it comes to COVID-19 response, is that there's quite a critical need for us to constantly assess and measure state capacity against productivity. And when we talk about productivity, it's about the ability to provide outputs and outcomes, and mostly in areas such as health and education. And then the second part is about functionality, so the bureaucratic capacity to set targets and be able to achieve them. If we're able to do that, we should be able to then do the basics right in the first place. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nigel. That's a really interesting summary. I love the phrase "the government is capable and the people know it." After the pandemic, it has shown, and it was I think quite this very much the case in a lot of jurisdictions, that a lot of normal systems were done away with, and government was able to deliver quickly. And I think that the key point is kind of how you take the lessons from that and build a more efficient system around it. I mean, you touched there on the need for improved performance management systems and kind of skills assessments and training and better measurements of productivity and delivery that is linked to the professionalism and the capability of the public service. What is the state of affairs in South Africa now? Are those things being built?
Well, there have been a number of reforms that were initiated, starting with the development of a human capital strategy for the whole public service that links all those issues, including recruitment for execution, not just to fill positions. I think it was Lauren who talked about it being difficult to, to collect the correct type of skills. But we have seen a little bit of a regress in terms of how we manage the system. People are more comfortable with doing what they were doing. One of the key things is that when we talk about strategic human resources, we're not talking about replacing. In government, usually, if Richard leaves the department, we want to replace a Richard. We don't want to look at what does the department require. So there is a very important need for strategic human resources units to play some sort of an early warning system across the state, because it is them that will understand who is not going on leave, which usually is a sign of some sort of malaise, or maybe they are having problems with the supervisors, issues of governance and issues of supervision, or they have problems at home. So we need to understand when we look at these things, because they're critical to the legitimacy of the state. When we look at most governments today, most governments are actually losing what you call clients, in terms of citizens preferring private services who can afford, and they take their kids to private schools. You go to a private dentist, you don't go to public schools, you don't use public transport. It's an issue of legitimacy of the state. So we need to understand that if we are not effective, we're not efficient, and we're not assertive in how we then deliver services, how we plan for those services, we are then moving away from the strategic nature that government is supposed to play. So those are the issues that have resulted in a little bit of I know it's dramatic when I say legitimacy of the state, but I think that's the level at which we need to look at it from. We also need to understand that not everyone is fully or gainfully employed in the system. And once we have systems to measure those areas, because most people were sent home or to work from home, or they were they were not there, but we did have a functional government. And if we did have a functional government, what does that mean? What is the implication of that? And do we need all those people that are there? Is it time to start using ICT? Is it time to start working through partnerships? Is it time to start using AI, for instance, as it has developed lately? So there is quite a regress towards where people are still using the normal tools and systems that they were using pre-COVID-19. So that means the public service and moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Nyako. You froze for a moment there, but I think we got the substance of your point there. Thank you very much. for that, and there's stuff there that we want to explore. I think the question around strategic human resources is a very good one, and we'll explore that later in the session. But before we get into that, I want to come to Mark. I think we've heard some really good examples from governments across the world about how they're kind of assessing the skills that they need across different areas, human skills and capabilities, technological skills, and even, you know, understanding of performance delivery and compliance and things like that. I wanted to bring you in to get kind of share how Skillsoft can help organizations assess their skills benchmarks and the knowledge base that they have.
Sure. Yeah, no, and thank you so much for the time today. We really appreciate the opportunity to engage with the panel and just to build upon some of the ideas that Peter, Lauren, and Nico had served up. I think the first kind of attribute when we think about measurement of skills is really a prioritization exercise. And I think Lauren brought this out when really thinking about technology skills. You know, you have to be very thoughtful across all skills, whether it's technology, leadership, professional effectiveness, you know, even if it's health and safety, compliance, and regulatory skills, to not try to boil the ocean, right? To actually be very focused. And you know, we work across a range of not only, you know, government customers, but also those obviously in the private sector across multiple industries. And usually the guidance that we try to provide around prioritization is really to look at skills as a function of what's in your annual operating plan. You know, what's in plan for this year? What do you need to get done? What are the wildly important goals and initiatives? And then what does that look like on a longer term basis? Like how does that actually correlate to your strategy? And if you can abstract, let's say the top, you know, 200, 300, 500 skills that you need and really correlate those to the roles that you have in the workforce, well, that's the first place on kind of a pathway to measurement. So the ways in which we work with customers along those lines is to really work with them to identify what those key and what those target skills are. We certainly have those skills and different skill taxonomies embedded within our platform that we bring to market that we call under the brand Percipio. And that those skill taxonomies can then be inferred into that architecture across job roles. And then we have a set of what we call skill benchmarks, which provide a level 2 diagnostics, getting back to the Kirkpatrick model that Peter laid out earlier. So as you're thinking about and analyzing kind of your learning and skilling challenges, we have ways in which we can curate those skill benchmarks against the target skills that you've defined. So we have somewhere on the order of 900 skill benchmarks created, which are nano assessments. They take 5 to 7 minutes to complete. And usually what organizations do is they curate those skill benchmarks and analytics against, you know, their skill taxonomies and so forth. The next level, and this is really kind of brought on by some of the innovations in AI, when you think about going beyond level 2 in terms of knowledge retention into level 3 and level 4, level 3 being, you know, how does behavior actually change in the business? And then level 4 being what's the ultimate impact, you know, to efficiency and ultimately the bottom line of service delivery. In level 3, typically that's been a very challenging thing to try to measure under using heritage technology, right? Because you'd have to do control groups to really kind of isolate behaviors, and certainly there could be a whole host of external factors. But through leveraging generative AI, through leveraging those types of AI models, you can actually create a very much kind of a conversational playground in a lot of ways and actually create simulated environments. We have a product experience we've brought into the market we call Casey, the Conversation AI Simulator, that leverages you know, the GPT-4 Azure OpenAI stack through Microsoft to actually track and measure the sentiment of conversations and everything ranging from how to coach and counsel you know, team members that may be struggling with certain kind of performance issues. How do you engage with clients? How do you actually you know, build executive presence? All the skills that organizations look to kind of drive and focus on. And that allows us to kind of measure sentiment of those conversations in a very highly realistic scenario where we can get to a relatively you know, reasonable proximity of what behavior change could be. And we can track those conversations pre and post. And so we think that presents some really exciting capabilities, you know, across multiple industries and inclusive of government. but also allowing people to track things that are very much important to kind of those service delivery, plans as you think about your annual operating plan and so forth. Also, we see a great demand on customizing those capabilities. So we kind of look at, skilling, skill taxonomies and really role and skill frameworks as almost like an organization's DNA. It's their blueprint. And so a lot of what we're doing, in terms of the content offerings that we have, in terms of our, skill measurements and some of the analytics that come out of that, is we're trying to match, that skill taxonomy and skill dictionary that we have to the genome of the customers that we work with. And the genome can actually differ a bit between government agencies. And so we see that certainly not only with the government entities that we work with in EMEA and the ones we work with in Canada, and certainly the ones we work with in the United States, but even within the operating models of the agencies across each one of those governments, we find that there's differences. So we actually work to use inferential logic and AI to actually map our dictionaries against their priorities, and then use our skill benchmarks to really provide kind of indexes on what those skills and capabilities are. So I know that's a very long-winded and maybe kind of circuitous response to a very simple question, Richard, but that's how we're actually helping people.
Yeah, no, that's great. Absolutely fabulous to hear that insight. I mean, just to follow up on that, you did touch on there, Mark, kind of leadership and kind of helping public service leaders deal with their teams and manage delivery. I mean, we've heard from the panel, and one doesn't need to look far to realize the level of change that governments are seeing. How in your kind of work with governments do you think leaders can respond to the kind of volatile environment that we're in and help their staff thrive?
Yeah, absolutely. And honestly, we could do an entire session on just this one question. I mean, I think, if I think about leadership, number one, leaders across all industries, government inclusive, are faced with a very unique set of challenges and disruptions. We're only, 3 to 5 years removed from a global pandemic, which changed the very nature of work, right? Where you have now leaders being asked to kind of manage co-located and/or hybrid teams that could be virtual, they could be on site. They have to manage and measure, right? Should lead through that dynamic. Number one. Number two, the leaders have actually turned over pretty remarkably and extensively over the last 3 to 5 years. We have an entire new team, an entire new population and community of leaders that have actually come into role in the last 3 to 5 years, many of whom have never received any type of formal coaching or leadership development. And they're actually doing it in some cases in virtual environment, leading in very extraordinary circumstances. Oh, by the way, late 2022, early 2023, ChatGPT-3 releases, which actually redefines how people think about work. So now we're actually thinking about a very different boundary between humans and machines. Like, what can machines do? Now we think about like machines and technology actually taking over things that were very much human-centric and almost intellectual work, right? So now that's a new kind of vector that leaders have to be very thoughtful about and be very prepared for. As we think about kind of the leadership, challenge in most organizations kind of focus on, I will say that, in a world of this level of disruption, that many organizations are coming to a conclusion that they've focused maybe too much on the notion of emotional intelligence, on empathy, on those things are very, very important, and those are critical, right? And those are the hallmark of all leadership programs. But those also have to be balanced with focuses on execution, accountability, leading through results, being able to quantify impact. So we're starting to see a blend of kind of those two worlds really come into fruition, like this notion of, leading with emotional intelligence, being able to kind of convey very nuanced and challenging messages in a variety of type of media. You may have to deliver very difficult messages, through a virtual environment, through like a Teams channel or a Zoom channel. At the same point in time, well, you have to have that emotional intelligence and the ability to kind of deliver those messages that does need to be balanced with accountability. And so what we actually start to see is a dynamic where many organizations that we work with, we will go in and we'll find and hear points of view and perspectives where, you know, they have challenges with their frontline leaders not driving accountability and holding people accountable. They will look at culture survey results that will suggest that most team members feel that their leader is their best friend, but for some reason they don't have confidence or feel the same way about senior leadership. And we look at those things as kind of indicators or warning signs of, okay, this is an organization that is really kind of over-indexed on leading with empathy, on, you know, on emotional intelligence, and they haven't focused on accountability. At the same point in time, you could also have the double impact where they're not supporting their frontline leaders really well. But if a leader has to deliver a difficult message, that the second and third level leaders that support those leaders, the leaders of leaders, are not standing behind the messages that the front line are delivering. And so that is also part of accountability and how we think about, you know, building trust-based leadership so that people understand who their first team is, how they actually align and roll into that, and how they actually blend and choreograph that blend of accountability with emotional intelligence in a very thoughtful way. And I know it's very easy for me to say on a recorded webinar in a session. It's much, much harder to practice. But that's actually where we see tools like leader coaching, using AI to simulate some of these difficult conversations and be able to measure the sentiment against a rubric, start to become very, very powerful tools. And those are some of the things that we work with customers every day to help them do a little bit better.
Great, thank you, Mark. Really interesting reflections on the leadership challenge. I'm now going to take some questions from everyone who is watching along. Thank you to everyone who has submitted questions so far. I mentioned we're going to touch on AI, and we will, I promise. But before we get there, I'm going to take a question from Olga Bakomi. Sorry if I don't pronounce that quite correctly, Olga. Who submitted our first question of the webinar. So thank you very much for that, which kind of neatly encapsulates the conversation, Olga. I couldn't resist it. The question from Olga was, how do we in government balance the need to maintain or reduce our resource footprint, doing more with less, while trying to upskill current resources to meet current and future digital government needs? So how when governments are doing faced with doing more with less broadly, can we measure the impact of delivery? I want to come to you on that, Peter, to begin with. You set out in the opening conversation the work that you do, and it was absolutely fascinating. Is quantifying impact something that you're able to do as part of the processes that you went through? Are you able to show where the difference has been made?
Sometimes, not always, because as Mark already mentioned, I think that the higher you get up the Socratic level, the harder it becomes to measure and isolate the true impact or effect of your training and learning and development actions from all the other factors which are intervening. But in some cases, yeah, we do measure transfer, we do measure impact. Now, looking at the question from Olga, and it's a very interesting question, I don't see a true how shall I say, incompatibility or tension between these two things, because so on the one hand, there is this, and I think it's everywhere, this urge to do more with less budget, less full-time equivalents. You just do the same thing or even more with less. And on the other hand, Olga mentioned that how can you combine this with the necessity of like upskilling and constantly evolving your staff? When I read this question, I thought, and I'm going to make a comparison, which may seem maybe a bit disrespectful to all of us civil servants, but I'm a civil servant myself, so I include myself. I may consider as batteries, and I just thought about that because I just bought an electric bike last week. Finally, I handed in. My friend said, "Okay, you can't do these hills and mountains anymore," so I bought an electric bike. And I remember what the guy at the bike shop told me. That was like, okay, Peter, if you want to keep this battery in an optimal performance, you're going to see that you have to recharge it once in a while, because even if you don't use it, You put it somewhere, you'll see after time, the battery will start decharging. So, and once again, it's maybe a not politically correct comparison, but if we're looking at ourselves as these batteries that can be recharged, I think we once start in our functions and we're fully loaded. We're fresh from university, high school, whatever. We're fully loaded. But after a while, we're not 100% anymore, 90%, 80%, because of the changing work environment or amongst us. What we were specialists in a year ago or 5 years ago is maybe not exactly the same environment we're living now. And in some professions like IT, this is very much the case. If an IT professional is not constantly learning, after 5 years, an important part of what he or she has learned will be outdated. So I guess what we're doing with this reskilling is after a while, when we see that the batteries of the full-time equivalents we're having is been going down to 70% or 60%, basically because work requires different things. And maybe people are not performing that optimal anymore because they do not master the new skills. The upskilling and reskilling actions we do is putting the batteries back, maybe not at 100%, but at 90% or 80%. And this does not mean to me that we have to invest in more batteries and more full-time equivalents. So for me, it's perfectly in balance with making sure that we don't augment our footprint. We're using exactly the same amount of full-time equivalents, but because of the temporary charging and the upskilling and the reskilling, we're using them. And using, once again, seems maybe not the correct word, but we're enabling them to perform in a more efficient and effective way than without the reskilling.
Yeah, I absolutely follow the analogy, Peter, and not just because I too have an electric bike, but I understand what the comparison. Absolutely, and yeah, a very worthwhile one. Lauren, I wanted to come to you because you set out some really interesting strategies that were being used in the Canadian government around the office of the CIO. How have you been able to measure the impact that has had?
So we measure tons of stuff. And we have a very rich data set on the platform that we work on that is very different than the data set that the Government of Canada has traditionally had. So in government, we are very good at being able to say, what jobs do we have in government? We are terrible at being able to say, what are our people capable of and what needs do we have? Because what needs do we have? What are our people capable of? This is a skills-based conversation, whereas the conversation we are structurally enabled to have in government is, what are the job descriptions? How many of them are there? What is the structure that they are put in an org chart? And so when it comes to conversations like the one we're having in Canada right now around trying to cut back in some areas in order to put resources into other new priorities, the kind of conversation that government can have is the data that it has collected and invested in is describing the jobs and the architecture of how they appear in organizations. And so the conversation around cutting is usually a conversation around cutting jobs, because that's the level of nuance that the 20th century HR model is capable of producing. Whereas when you get into a skills-based conversation, some of the things that Mark was referring to, you have a modern architecture for things like interfacing with a lot of AI intelligence, although you don't even always need to use AI there. If a system can be made logical without AI, I think sometimes it's better to avoid the AI, because then you have better accountability on things like bias reduction. But we have a system that's capable of saying, what skills do your people have? So we're in a very strange situation right now where we have quite a few departments that have come to us basically saying, can we work with you to do a skills audit? Because we want to move some people around, we want to retrain, we don't necessarily want to cut jobs, but we do have new needs. But what we're working with is data that is all about structure and organization, and not at all about people and skills, but people and skills is the agile conversation we have to have in order to respond. And that requires the nuanced data around skills. And it's also important, I think, to be able to have not just people claim a skill, but one of the things we've put a lot of work into over the years is designing how people produce a record of evidence against that skill. So on your resume, you write what you did, and now it's very fashionable to get AIs to comb through resumes and do keyword search and then say that people are qualified. Hooray! You use the word architecture, therefore you must be a cloud architect. Hooray! And of course, it doesn't work like that. So what we've been designing is a methodology for trying to get people to be able to articulate how they earned a skill, when they used that skill, and then for that record of evidence against a skill to translate into meaning on the manager side. So when a manager does a call up and say, I need somebody who can do cloud architecture, they can read through these records of evidence that people have put together, and it has meaning for them. We also note with this bias reduction methodology, we end up with a much more diverse group of people who get picked for jobs without ever having to go through that head count thing that you get with the sort of more dated versions of affirmative action. We don't do any of that, but we do get a lot of diversity because people get mad wicked skills from everywhere. You just need an engine that's capable of seeing humans, not just seeing structures.
Thank you, Lauren. That's a great answer. And I'm going to use your mention of AI there as a jumping off point, because I did mention we would get to an AI discussion. Becky Randall has asked, how can civil servants upskill in digital and AI technologies in their current roles? I'm going to use the moment to plug a video that or share a video from Global Government Forum's innovation conference this year, where we had a masterclass on generative AI, which I, when I went through this training, found very useful on using AI. But I'll use that as just a jumping off point. I'll bring in Mark first, and then come to Nico on AI. How do you think automation, use the broad term perhaps, will impact the skills that civil services need, and how would you advise people to kind of stay current with the skills that they have as the technology develops?
Yeah, well, this is another great question. Again, we could run an entire hour-long webinar on this one alone. I think number one, it's undeniable that this AI transformation that we're in the middle of, or just beginning, I should say, we're not in the middle of it, is actually unlike other digital transformations that have occurred in our industry, right? I think, the World Economic Forum tracks actually a very interesting statistic, which is kind of the human machine frontier. And that measure, I think just a few years ago, was only around a third of all work could be reasonably automated. 3 years later, that number I think has jumped up to somewhere between 47 and 48%. I may not have it. It's in the Future of Jobs report that was just published. To put that into context, that number moved, at that rate, 10 points over the course of like 3 to 5 years. In the 3 to 5 years that preceded that period, which, oh, by the way, was the pandemic, that human machine frontier only moved about 1 point. I mean, the theoretical boundary to what humans and machines can actually do, autonomously or assisted wise. So that's why this is such a profound change, is that this is actually redefining how work can be done, and redefining what humans will do, how they'll work with machines, how those things will be automated. Now, I will say that, but out of the other side of my mouth, will say that automation, while it's happening very quickly, it doesn't happen overnight, and ultimately that automation is largely human-led. Those are made by, those decisions of what gets automated are actually made by human beings. I will just observe that many of the work tasks, the processes that exist within government service are things that require a level of certainly human in the loop, human oversight, but they do present a tremendous opportunity, because a lot of that work can be automated through large language models, through generative AI, through agentic AI. And so certainly there's a massive opportunity there, but there also has to be a level of caution because with every government, entity, there's different regulations. We know in EMEA, for example, there's the EU AI Act, right? And there's other legislation that's coming into play. We have things around data privacy concerns, cybersecurity. So all those things need to be really contemplated. Well, therein lies a lot of the skilling challenge as well, right? When we think about upskilling and reskilling, not only in the in the public sector, in the government space, but also in the private sector and in the commercial space, we think about that really in the lens of kind of three very specific personas. You have the front line that need to use AI to do their jobs differently, and they need to do that in a thoughtful and really constructive way. And so what we've typically done is we'll actually work with an organization to understand what their AI use cases are. Most organizations have them. They've listed them out in 1 to 100 based on the impact of the business. And we just try to understand, what's the level of readiness from the frontline personas by doing some of the basic skill diagnostics that, Peter mentioned. You go through a basic CADDI model, you try to understand, are these things really training issues? Are they manifest in different performance issues, and try to build kind of the skilling programs from there. The second level then is to really engage the leaders and actually help them think about this transformation, the strategic benefit, actually build the case for AI, to think about it in a very quantitative way so they prioritize the use cases in a meaningful way that benefits the business, but also do that in a very responsible way. So there's a lot of training we do on that front end as well. And then thirdly, it's really looking at the technology personas. These are the folks who are responsible for implementing these next generation solutions. And I will say the way in which, a data and a cybersecurity professional versus a data scientist versus a cloud architect versus someone that works in infrastructure, the way in which they all use AI is very, very different. So we actually think about AI use cases at those sub-persona levels. We certainly, being Skillsoft, we have out-of-the-box learning solutions that cover that. They're blended in many ways with what we do with Global Knowledge in a classroom and instructor-led virtual standpoint. So, but a lot of that involves a lot of upfront diagnostic around those three personas to really curate a meaningful program. And oh, by the way, have some level of level 2 and level 3 diagnostics through the way where we can actually measure that behavior. But certainly we have case studies that we're also able to share along those lines. So again, another very long-winded response, but a very, very provocative and compelling topic.
Yeah, no, absolutely. A great response. Thank you very much for sharing all that. And yes, if there's case studies, yeah, we were happy to share them with participants after the webinar. I wanted to come to you, Niko, just to follow up on the AI point, and then I'll come to Peter and Lauren on it. You set out a lot of the kind of reform work that South Africa is doing to build the capabilities of the public service. How are you accounting for AI in your planning? Is it a lot? Are you building in the capabilities now, or are you kind of predicting to some extent what will be able to be done by AI in the future?
Thank you so much, Richard. In South Africa, we developed what we call a framework on skills auditing. So we are trying to look at the type of skills that we have within the system first, to understand what we term the redefining of the future skills in terms of with the implications of AI. So there were 7 areas actually that we identified for us to effectively use, or rather for public servants to effectively use AI. We need to have about 7 future skills, what we call 7 future skills. The first one, I think, is the one on self-directed learning. So as part of your development as an individual public servant, you really have to drive yourself to understand what skills gaps you have. The second one is critical thinking. So just because you can type a number of things on ChatGPT, it doesn't mean that whatever comes out is something that you can use. So you have to have the critical ability to understand what that means. The third one is creative thinking. So you need to creatively use that information because it comes from a number of documents and systems and bots that are all over the internet. So you need to understand how to creatively use that information as you move forward. Then the fourth one, I think I'm on the fourth one, yes, it's collaboration and leadership, being able to bring everyone together to understand how you are using AI and how AI impacts on their areas of work and how you implement whatever comes up of that. Then the fifth one is the issue of being able to communicate in all forms and all formats. So whatever comes out of AI, you must be able to translate it to the people that you work with and the clients that you're trying to serve, the public. So if you don't understand how to communicate in all various formats, whether it's graphs, whether it's pictorials or whatever, then you are not able to make use of AI. Then the sixth one, yes, it's entrepreneurship. So being able to be entrepreneurial in terms of how you look for that information, not being stuck in one form of AI, but being able to collaborate and use different types of AIs to understand and move forward in the work that you do. And then lastly, the seventh one is the issue of social and emotional aptitude. So computers, by their very own nature, they tend to move away from being emotional, understanding the social aspects. Whatever comes up from AI will normally just give you the solution, but as you know, in public policy and in government and governance, you must be able to have that aptitude of understanding how the social realities are on the ground and how you then look at those. So those are the areas that we are trying to look at. As I mentioned earlier, on average, South African public servants have about 3 degrees. So the critical issue that is outstanding for us is the issue of what you call that elevating what do you call it, elevating competences. So the things that we used to call soft skills that have now suddenly become real skills in both our retraining, our recruitment, and our deployment of new technologies that come through. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nico. I wanted to bring Peter in on AI as well, because you mentioned it in your contribution, Peter, particularly
Mhm.
how you'd learned from colleagues in other governments and how they were using AI. How are you factoring it into your thinking?
Yeah, well, we're doing different things. On the one hand, we're using AI in our daily functions in the training department. So where we're, as many other civil servants around the world, I think, exploring the different possibilities by checking out to what extent it can simplify our work. And if it's from either making a presentation or making sure that we have training programs elaborated, it's amazing what AI can do now that it couldn't do yesterday. So I'm waiting to see what it can do tomorrow. In terms of skills training, we've been applying this kind of layered, it's kind of like cake-like, traditional wedding cake-like approach. That is, to our civil servants, we're offering like a huge big bottom of a kind of introductory courses on the AI oriented to a vast amount of civil servants. Usually these kind of courses could be online modules, could be e-learnings, or could be some introductions. Basically, they're sharing some of the things that Nico mentioned already, like in terms of watch outs. These are some of the dangers of AI. How you could write prompts, for instance, because the way you're going to write your prompt will decide. So this is kind of general layer. And then the higher you get, the more specialized courses become, the smaller the target audience. For instance, you could schedule courses like how to use AI within a training business or within human resources management, or how to use AI for policymaking. Audience is smaller, but more specific things. And then you go to the top level, our IT staff, like, they need to be following up what's happening in the AI field very closely. So they probably know better than us in HR what kind of specialized trainings they need for that. There's only two things that put a bit of how shall I say, a break on all this. And the first thing is the budget, because even though lots of AI things are freely available, like ChatGPT and the free version and whatever, Copilot and so on, once you get to more specialized versions, there is a price linked to that. So organizations in the Belgian civil service are confronted with the question like, okay, what kind of licenses are we going to buy? Are we going to buy a license for everyone? And to what? Because soon you'll see that you don't only need this AI tool, but that AI tool and that AI tool as well. This has a budgetary impact. So one of the questions linked is like, okay, how far can we go there? And the second thing, and I'm talking to my colleagues all around the world, I think we're facing the same challenges. That is the legal framework. And I don't know if it was Lauren or Mark who mentioned this already, like the EU legislation on AI is just one thing. And I should say, even in our federal civil servants, we're getting very quick reactions from our legal experts and our IT staff. They say, ho, watch out, don't go too fast. We have to create the framework for, and the framework is being made. But when I see the incredibly fast development of AI, I fear that the framework will always be one step too late. And people are experimenting in the workplace with the free tools that maybe they're not always supposed to experiment with. So once again, this hugely stresses for me and for us the importance of creating this awareness, like, watch out. It's okay to use ChatGPT if you're going to give a presentation on a language course. It's going to help you there, but think twice when you're going to put some important documents linked to governmental decisions, if you're going to put them in an open source AI system. So these are some of the thoughts I wanted to share on that.
And that's just want to bring in Lauren there. I appreciate we're right up against time. This session is absolutely flown by. Thank you, everyone. I wanted to just bring in Lauren there because you mentioned in your opening comments, Lauren, how government loves to create structures that are stable, that job descriptions will kind of be and job templates will be created, and the default is that they perhaps don't change. AI is going to make that, if that is the status quo, going to make that ever more difficult, isn't it? Because AI is going to mean that the skills that you perhaps needed for a job 2 or 3 years ago are totally different from what they are now. How would you say that you're going to be able to adapt to the skills needs, things like the job template library that you mentioned, with AI as it develops?
So one of the things that's been released, really great work by one of our sibling teams here in OCIO, is digital competencies for all public servants. And a big part of what that emphasizes is the ability to continuously learn. So it's AI right now, but what AI looks like in 3 years' time will probably be quite different again. And as Richard said, it's going to have to keep evolving. But it's not just tech workers, obviously, who are going to use AI. And I mean, we're at the start of what is going to be quite a revolution for us as a society. But I can't help but think the more I play with AI, the more I hear stories about AI, it seems more and more human to me. It almost seems like an additional workforce, where sometimes you get excellent researchers and sometimes you get the garbage researchers who just went to Reddit and pulled an opinion. Like, my daughter and I were looking up something in a manga the other day, and then we got this whole opinion about something, and then it's like not even in there. It's like not even true. It's like the AI just like made something up. It's like, I don't even know where it came from. So it, in many ways, the interpersonal skills we have, where we filter who we trust, who we share with, who we trust with our data, who we believe when they tell us things, how many voices in the room is the right number of voices. In many ways, the skills we've developed socially to interact with other humans are becoming more and more relevant as AI becomes more and more advanced. We have to apply the same interpersonal skills in a way but we are being interpersonal with an AI system. And that's a really interesting moment for me. I'm a big sci-fi fan, so that's a whole other threshold. But I look forward to finding out what that's going to mean for all of us.
That's a very intriguing note on which to end, I think, end our webinar today. And that is where I'm going to have to bring the session to a close. It's absolutely flown by. So thank you very much to our panel for joining us today. I thought that was a fascinating discussion, and to everyone for watching along. Thank you for submitting the questions, and apologies to Shire Harrod in particular, because I know you submitted some comments that were very interesting, but I wasn't able to put them to the panel. We ran out of time. Apologies, Shire, but I will share them with all the participants too. Also, want to thank Skillsoft for joining us as our knowledge partner today. Just following our session, you should be receiving a short survey from Global Government Forum shortly. It would really help me and my colleagues here if you were able to complete it. There'll be a recording of this webinar available in the next couple of days too, and there will be a report on the Global Government Forum website in the next couple of weeks as well. So once again, thank you everyone for joining us today, and I hope to see you on another one of our Global Government Forum webinars soon. Please enjoy the rest of your day.